We are just a few days away from UFC 281 in Madison Square Garden, which will feature one of my favorite matchups of the year as Dustin Poirier takes on Michael Chandler. And in this video, I want to break down this fight and some of the things that stood out to me and how these two match up. If you're new to the channel or a new subscriber, thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing. And to give you an idea of what these videos will be about, I'll be taking a look at certain matchups and highlighting things that I think may be significant in how two fighters match up. The videos won't be completely extensive because that would really take hours, and some of these videos are already long enough. If anything, I would like to shorten them over time and just really hone in on a few things, but it can be tough. When I analyze things and break things down, I get a little bit carried away. You tend to find more and more things that are interesting about fights, and martial arts in general is just fascinating to me. In addition to breakdown and analysis videos, I will also be covering news and the latest happenings in MMA or video ideas that you may have. So if you have an idea for a video or a topic you'd like to see me cover, feel free to drop it in a comment below. Also worth noting is that the visuals from the fights used to illustrate the points in these videos are still images and screenshots. And the reason for that is that I would like to use video footage, but I don't want to deal with copyright strikes in the UFC or demonetization issues. And I know at the time of making this video, this channel is not monetized, but it's more of a future-proofing thing. And in the past, I used to make MMA highlight videos here and there when I was younger just for fun. And every time I would upload them to YouTube, after a while, they would just get copyright strikes on them and either taken down or blocked in certain areas and, you know, all the stuff that comes along with that. But if you know a way around that or know a way to deal with that, feel free to comment below. I'm all ears to any suggestions, and I would love to use video footage just without the consequences of doing so or infringing on any copyrights legitimately. So now looking at this fight, one of the first things I like to do when comparing two fighters in a matchup is look at the stats on paper, look at some of the numbers, see how they match up, see if there's anything glaring that stands out. But with Poirier and Chandler, their statistics or their immediate statistics on UFC stats are so similar that it's really not even worth looking at. They're virtually identical, as Mike Goldberg would say, in so many areas, with Chandler having a slight advantage in the takedown statistics, both in offense and defense. The biggest differences with them is the stance and age. They're 3 years apart, but I don't really think that'll play a significant factor here. But the Southpaw versus Orthodox stance difference will, and I'll get into that as we move along. A couple interesting notes I did notice though when looking at their last 4 fights is that they both have landed 2 knockdowns in their last 4 fights combined, but Poirier has not been knocked down himself, whereas Chandler has been knocked down 4 times. They also have a few common opponents in the last few years. They both have fought Charles Oliveira, Dan Hooker, and Justin Gaethje. In the Justin Gaethje fight, Chandler went to decision with him, whereas Poirier finished him in round 4. With Charles Oliveira, both of them lost those fights, with Chandler being finished in round 2 and Poirier in round 3. And with the Dan Hooker fight, Chandler made his debut in the UFC, knocking out Hooker in 1 round in really impressive fashion. I'm going to go over that in this and how he did that exactly. And Poirier actually had a very surprising 5-round war with Hooker, so that's a pretty significant difference there. The last thing I have here in my notes is that Poirier hasn't fought in 336 days, and Chandler's last fight was 189 days ago, which is likely irrelevant, but it's worth noting that Poirier is coming off a loss almost a year ago, whereas Chandler is coming off a win in half the time and has been more active overall. So now getting into some of the specifics of this fight, I want to start with Chandler's game. Now Chandler's game is pretty simple in theory. It's not to say that he's not technical nor effective. It's just that the main weapons that he uses and the goals he's trying to accomplish are pretty straightforward. He really likes using the jab followed by the right hand, or using the jab to throw the right hand to the body. He'll sometimes mix it up and lead with the right hand instead and come back with the left hook up top. When he uses his jab, he uses it more as like a power jab. At least that's what I refer to it as. He really lunges in with it and throws it with a lot of power rather than flicking it at distance and sticking and moving. And I'll show you an example of that here in a second. But that's significant because it really sets up a lot of his game, both in terms of offense and kind of some defensive weaknesses. It can leave him open to counters. But really the core of his game revolves around 2 things: the jab to right hand, or the right hand to the body followed by the left hook. The threat of the takedown is also always looming in his opponent's minds because, as we know, Chandler is really explosive. He's one of the best athletes at 155, maybe the best pure athlete at 155, and he can turn almost any position into a takedown and change levels really fast. But I'll get into how he mixes up these things, but let's take a look at some of his primary weapons here. Looking at some of the visuals here from the Gaethje fight, you know, he loves to use that 1-2, loves to throw the jab and throw that right hand hard. He really, you know, turns into it and throws it with a ton of power. Chandler is just all about power and, you know, 99% of his strikes, which can be a good thing and a bad thing, but we'll talk more about that. Also, you know, sometimes he'll mix it up. He'll throw that jab up high and then he'll throw that right hand to the body. He really likes using this right hand to the body, as you'll see as we go along. And then, as I said before, sometimes he'll lead with the right hand to the body and follow it up with the left hook up high. So again, going back 1 frame, he throws that right hand. This one hits him more in the chest, but he'll often throw it like to the abdomen. And the reason for that is that it'll get the opponent to drop their hands, or at least hopefully, and then he'll follow it up with the left hook. Now in this example, Charles stayed pretty disciplined and kept his hand near his chin, and he also moved back out of the way so Chandler missed this hook, but I'll show you some examples of where he landed this combo. So right here against Charles Oliveira again, he leads with the right hand, again throwing it more towards the midline of the body, more towards the sternum and the chest, and he comes back up with this left hook, but he lands it this time. Charles backed out of the way, or at least partially, to kind of take some of the sting out of it. But this is going to be a common combo that you see Chandler throw over and over again. An example of his jab here against Gaethje, he can cover a lot of distance with it, and you can see that he really leans into this jab. So again, going back, he starts right here, but look where he ends up. He really leans in. He covers a lot of distance here to really throw that jab. Now, one thing I want to point out here is if we go back a frame and remove this arrow here, is that this is all happening, in milliseconds time. So moving through it, you can see that, he's still lunging into this jab. But one of the things I want to cover here is that it leaves him open to counters like this hook that Gaethje's throwing, because it's going to take Chandler longer to back out of this jab. It's the difference between jabbing from here and staying in my stance versus lunging in and then having to come all the way back out. Of course, I'm exaggerating the movement, but the idea is that exit from the entrance, recoiling back, I call it the recoil, recoiling back takes time. And when you do that, you leave yourself open to counters. And a lot of the times he won't see the counters, like he didn't against Oliveira, and I'll show that one as well. But again, here in this example, this counter just barely grazes him and misses him. But the idea is that he was in the line of fire because he committed to this jab so much. Just a simple jab, he throws it with a ton of power, leans in, really commits to the strike, and that can leave him open for counters. Now, moving back to that right hand that he likes to throw to the body, and in the same vein of leaving himself open for counters, he really likes to lead with the right hand and kind of throw it naked. Like he doesn't really set it up with anything, maybe a couple of feints, but he doesn't really throw it with like a combo beforehand or a leg kick or anything like that. He'll just simply lunge in and throw that right to the body, and sometimes he'll double up on it or even triple up on it. He might do it 2 or 3 times in a row. The reason he throws this right hand to the body is because he sinks really, really low when he throws it, so you don't know if it's a shot coming in, like a double leg takedown, or if he's throwing a shot to the body. So it creates that confusion element for the opponent where they don't know if they're getting hit in the body or if he's about to shoot on him. However, the issue with that is leading with that right hand, he has to cover a lot of distance fast, and he certainly has the athleticism and speed to do it, but it can leave him open for counters in general with that lunging style, and that's going to be kind of the reoccurring theme here. The more he lunges into power, the more he can leave himself open for counters. So looking here at the Oliveira fight, he steps in here, winds up with this right hand to throw to the body. Oliveira kind of moves out of the way to deflect it, but this is kind of his bread and butter shot he likes to use. And here's a first example here of leaving himself open. Because he lunged in so far to lead with that right hand, it gives Oliveira time to move this way, and then he gets this dominant angle on Chandler to where he's still in distance to be able to touch him with his hand and put that lead hand on his shoulder. And he could potentially fire a right hand here and counter, but in this case, he simply backs up. But it's worth noting that he creates these potential angles on himself, him being Chandler, because of his lunging in style of throwing with a lot of power. He really commits to these shots, and that can leave him open to these potential bad angles. Again, here against Tony Ferguson, he's going to cover a ton of ground here, leading with this right hand to the body. And in this one, as he comes up out of it, he comes out of his stance because he's got to keep chasing Tony. So that lead leg trailing behind him, this leg here is going to come up to right about here roughly, and you can see him square up here out of his stance. Now this is another issue with this potentially lunging in with that single lead shot, is if the opponent sees it coming because it's thrown from so far away, he can move back like this, and Chandler's gonna have to chase. And when he chases, he risks coming out of his stance like this. This is a dangerous stance to be in. His hips are squared up. He could potentially be taken down or, countered straight on here. This is just not a great spot to be in. Now, in this specific case with Tony, he continues to chase, and he throws this left hook up top. And this is one of his favorite combos, as you're going to see as I go through this. He loves to throw the right straight to the body and follow it up with the left hook up top. Again, he's trying to get his opponent to drop his hands in order to open up the chin, to keep the face unguarded, to throw this high shot, this high left hook, to hopefully land that knockout shot. In this case, Tony, is moving backwards with the shot so it doesn't fully land clean, and he's able to get out of harm's way. But against Dan Hooker, that's how Chandler landed the knockout with this exact combo, and I'll show you exactly how that happened. So looking at the Hooker fight, we can see how this all comes together when it works successfully, and why he throws this right hand to the body. So taking a look at this sequence here and what led to the ultimate KO, Chandler here is at distance. He steps in with that lunging right hand lead.
He actually throws a little bit of a jab feint there. You can kind of see, you know, Hooker's deflecting it, but he's mainly just winding up for this right hand lead. So a little bit of a jab feint there, feinting the jab, stepping in with the right. He connects to the body. He actually steps on Hooker's foot here too, closing the distance. Interesting little tidbit there. Connects to the body. Hooker circles out. Take note of the time here as well, 3:10. So moving ahead 4 seconds later, Chandler's going to go for the same thing again. Lunges in, throws the right to the body. Hooker tries to counter here with the left, but Chandler's able to slip it off the center line. And again, Hooker backs up. This whole fight, Hooker was pretty hesitant to engage, and Chandler was looking to capitalize on that, which he ultimately did. Again, moving ahead, you see the time again, moving ahead about 20-30 seconds roughly into the fight. This time, Chandler's going to step in and feint. He's going to fake that body shot. So again, Hooker's going to counter with that left, right, or attempt to. Chandler stops right here. So in this position, you don't know if he's going to shoot on the hips, which everyone's always worried about with Chandler because he's got that explosive double leg, or if he's going to continue throwing that same body shot. You can see here that Hooker has the exact same stance and position as he did before, expecting that body shot to come in and to counter over the top here, but Chandler fakes it this time, adding that element of confusion. So again, going ahead a few seconds, Hooker starts to circle out this way. And we move ahead here, and Chandler's going to throw that same attack one more time. Here comes the lunging right hand to the body. Hooker's going to drop his hands this time, again, also extending this lead hand for the same exact response. But what's going to change this time is Chandler's going to follow it up with his favorite left hook. So the hands come down here. Hooker thinks he's just going to circle out again because, you know, it's happened 3 times now. You know, there's been 3 times that Chandler has thrown that right to the body, or the last one he feinted it, and, you know, Hooker has simply circled out. So he drops his hand to circle out, but this time, here it comes, the bomb, boom, right on the button, clean, and he scores the KO. So moving through it again one more time really quickly. He starts off by lunging in, right to the body, Hooker circles out. Again, right to the body, Hooker circles out. He steps in, feints it, Hooker circles out. This time he throws it again. Hooker goes to circle out, left hook, boom, knockout. So that's essentially what Chandler's looking to do with this right to the body, and he won't hesitate to throw it, you know, 2 or 3 times in a row sometimes. He's looking to get you to drop your hands to land that big bomb, that huge left hook up top, or to get you to think about the takedown and ultimately land that. You know, that's always an option for him. So when those big shots come together, it looks great. It can land devastating knockouts or really hurt his opponents and stun them and set them up for the finish. But when it doesn't work, it can also open him up for counters. So going back to the Gaethje fight, Chandler here is going to throw the 1-2. So he throws the jab out there. He winds up on this right hand. Again, going back one frame, you can see that he's really winding up on this from back here. So he throws a jab, throws a really hard right to the point where he's going to rotate past Gaethje. You know, he's facing this way at this point, which is going to make it tough to rotate back into Gaethje when Gaethje's starting to get this perpendicular angle on him. So moving on here with the sequence, Chandler has a much longer route to turn back into Gaethje here than Gaethje does to turn into him. And his own arm is also in the way right here. So moving through this, as he starts to come in, Chandler has to keep this arm low to kind of create space between him and Gaethje. He's like framing on his face because Gaethje can also shoot an underhook here, which would put him in a really bad spot because Chandler's hips are squared up. He could get taken down here potentially, so he has to defend that. But he also has to defend the punch, which you're going to see is what ultimately happens here. So he throws this left hook because Chandler's arm was low, and that's kind of the downside here to these lunging shots. Is that, you know, because he has to rotate so far to throw the shot, you know, he has to rotate so far that it's hard to come back from that if you miss. It takes time to come back, even though this is happening in milliseconds, it takes time to rotate back. So, you know, Gaethje's able to throw the counter shot, and Chandler is ultimately going to rotate into it. And it knocks him off balance here. It was a pretty good shot. You know, look at his feet here. He's out of position again. And, you know, you can see he's stumbling backwards here. So that can be the downside to throwing those lunging shots, is being open to counters. Here against Oliveira, we can see something similar happen. I want you to take note of where they are both starting. So, you know, in relation to, let's say like the ring post back here, you can use this as your guide. Chandler starting here, and Oliveira, you know, is roughly to the left of this logo. So just a rough idea of where they're starting. So Chandler's going to really lunge in to throw a right hand. They both come in though, right? So from here is where it's important to pay attention to the issue with lunging versus staying tight in your stance. And staying tight in your stance is something that typically Poirier does really well. So Chandler lunges in, throws the left hand, he throws the right to the body, but here's the issue now. Because he lunged in so far, he has a long way to travel to come back out of this. Now let's go back a couple frames and see where Oliveira comes in and lands. He lands right here, right? His feet are planted right here. Now he's going to stay here the whole time, but look what Chandler has to do. Chandler has to travel back to exit this exchange. So as he starts to exit back, Oliveira is still planted in the same spot in a tight stance, and he's going to throw the counter hook this way as Chandler's traveling back this way. And Chandler's not going to see it coming because of this, because of that travel time. Oliveira is staying tight in his stance, and he can throw a perfect hook, which lands right on the chin as Chandler is recoiling out of that lunge. And that was ultimately fatal for this fight. You know, it led to the knockout where he got finished with strikes. Now, another thing I noticed with Chandler when watching his fights is that he has a propensity to get a little inactive in clinch situations, specifically with the collar tie or the tie clinch. And he can be open to uppercuts in the clinch or uppercuts when he throws his jab. So again, looking at the Gaethje fight here, he comes in with the 1-2. Again, winds up, Gaethje slips it, and Gaethje's ultimately going to throw this hand up over the top and get a collar tie on him. They get tangled up at first here, and his hand gets kind of blocked, but Gaethje swims it out over the top and gets this clinch position. Now, right away, Gaethje's going to work to throw this uppercut. It can be hard to see from this angle, but you can see his arm here is in motion. So he throws the uppercut here and connects. And then as they move closer to the camera here, you'll notice that Chandler just kind of becomes defensive and inactive in this scenario. So they're hand fighting, they're moving through the clinch, and Chandler's just kind of fending him off. He's trying to block his hand. He's resting here with this collar tie. Nothing really offensive going on. It's more defensive. And again, a few seconds later, they end up in a clinch position again here where Chandler has a body lock. But again, he's not really doing anything with it. Gaethje backs his hips out, gets an overhook, and Chandler here again is just kind of hanging on. There's not a lot of offensive movement going on here. And Gaethje eventually works to get a dominant position in the clinch, grabbing this collar tie again, kind of this tie clinch position, and he's going to throw uppercuts again from this. And Chandler this whole time really hasn't done anything offensive. He's just been really defensive in the clinch and gets hit by this uppercut. And when he gets hit by the uppercut, he seems a little bit stunned by it. And again, he's in this squared up position out of his stance, you know, arms are forward, broken posture. Not a great stance, not a great position to be in. Now, in the same fight, when he would throw his jab, you know, he would throw this jab, Gaethje would throw this hook sometimes to counter, which was a great counter. But sometimes Chandler, this is all in the same sequence. Sometimes Chandler would throw this jab 2 or 3 times in a row, which starts to, you know, obviously become predictable. So let me go back a couple frames here. He throws the jab, and then he throws this left hook counter. Chandler backs up. Chandler's going to throw the jab again. So Gaethje's starting to get this timing now that Chandler's going to throw this jab. Gaethje starts to preemptively load up on this uppercut, and Chandler's going to throw this jab again. So a third time, this jab's going to come in. As Chandler throws the jab a third time, that uppercut that Gaethje was loading up on comes through and clips Chandler, you know, pretty good here. So, you know, he started to time this jab, and Chandler would throw it in a predictive manner where you throw it 2 or 3 times without hesitation, and that just gives Gaethje time to counter that, especially underneath. But in general, Chandler seems to have that opening for the uppercut. Now again, less than 20 seconds later, they're out in the open again, and Gaethje goes to throw that left hook again to counter it, but this time he comes back with this uppercut underneath when Chandler throws the jab again and nails him and gets a knockdown from it. Chandler has a tendency to sometimes get in these patterns of repeating the same attack over and over again, whether that's that right hand to the body or throwing the jab out there, and that can allow a good striker to get his timing and to throw an uppercut counter, a hook counter, etc. So that's something to keep note of here against someone like Poirier, who's a really good boxer and can take advantage of things like this. So in the same vein, one of the disadvantages of this powerful lunging type of fighting style is that you can telegraph things and allow your opponent to counter and to get your timing down. Here against Gaethje, we're going to see an example of this to where Chandler, you know, they have a lot of distance between them here, and he's going to cover that distance pretty quickly, but also in a way where there's a lot of telegraphing. So he feints the shot, but it's pretty far away, so it's not that big of a threat. Chandler can cover this distance with his athleticism and his speed, but generally somebody like Gaethje, who's also a very good wrestler himself, probably isn't going to bite on a feint like this. So coming out of that feint, he's going to take a big lunging step, and you can see it here. You know, you can see the telegraph footwork, and Gaethje's ready for this incoming shot. And as he takes that big step, he winds up on this big uppercut attempt. So watch how far back he pulls this. I mean, you can see who's going to probably get here first in this exchange. Gaethje's hand is way closer to Chandler's face than Chandler's hand is to Gaethje's face. There's much further space to travel through there. So this allows Gaethje to reach him first with that counter. I mean, Chandler still has a long way to go before this even gets to Gaethje if it was going to land. So the disadvantage, of winding up like this with these big shots is that your opponent will get to you first a lot of the time before you get to him. Moving on here to Tony Ferguson, that same sequence, he throws that right hand to the body, and as he comes up out of his stance, he has to chase him to throw this left hook, and he's gonna double up on this same attack again. Just a couple seconds later, he continues to chase Tony down by throwing the same right hand to the body, but this time Tony is gonna counter him with the jab, and he gets hit by that, and it knocks him way off balance here. Winding up on shots can telegraph, and also doubling up on those attacks can telegraph and leave him open for counters. So you may be asking yourself at this point, why did I bring up the Southpaw versus Orthodox difference back at the start when going over the stats if all those examples were against Orthodox fighters? Or, well, Ferguson fights Southpaw a lot of the time, but he'll switch stances pretty fluidly. And ultimately, it's a good question. So I want to get into the Southpaw example specifically because I think Poirier's Southpaw style will give Chandler a lot of trouble here, or potentially can give him a lot of trouble. So one fight that was interesting to look at was Chandler's most recent fight with Benson Henderson. I mean, he won it by knockout, but at first Benson was looking pretty good. And one of the strikes that Benson kept landing was the right hook to the body here. So you'll see him throw this shot. He'll throw it solo sometimes or in combinations, and he kept landing it on Chandler. As they went through the fight, Chandler would step in with this right, and Benson was open for this counter right here if he wanted it, but he would pull back and either throw this shot to the face, or he would pull back and throw the body shot instead. He was really landing this body shot over and over again. And that can pay dividends against someone like Chandler, where you want to drain his gas tank and really remove a lot of the sting out of his shots. So again here, Chandler comes in aggressively, throws the right hand, and again, Benson Henderson comes around the side here to throw this hook to the body. Boom, lands it, and this one stung pretty good because Chandler went off balance from it, and you could tell that it had some impact. Another thing that Benson was throwing was the body kick, and he was throwing it, from a southpaw. It's going to hit on the power side of Chandler here on that powerful right hand that he has. And the commentary team was talking about how this was a good kick for him to throw because it'll make Chandler chamber this hand. It'll make him keep it close to his body in order to defend this strike. Now, Poirier has a decent body kick himself, but sometimes he can be open to having that kick caught, which I'll show you here in a second. And Benson also got his kick caught there as well, which I will also show you. So looking at Poirier here against Dan Hooker, he throws that body kick, but he throws it in a way where Hooker was entangling it up and catching it sometimes. Poirier actually has a better teep kick. So, Benson here, same thing. He would throw the body kick and it would land and have good impact on Chandler, but sometimes he also caught it though. So that can be a potential issue, when dealing with someone like Chandler who can take you down. Poirier probably won't want to throw that a lot. And again, as I mentioned, Poirier has a pretty good fast teep kick. He's throwing it here against Gaethje. He's pretty fast with it. It makes guys back up if it doesn't connect. He can create distance pretty quickly with it, throwing it against Hooker, throwing it against Holloway. It's something that he likes to use, and it can also drain the gas tank, again, out of someone like Chandler who you want to fatigue and drain the power out of. It can be good to stab it, to the body here and to really drain his power over time. So again, continuing with the southpaw theme here, let's look at Chandler versus Ferguson, which was Chandler's most recent fight. And if I'm a Chandler fan and I'm worried about anything, it would be some of the things that he showed in this fight, because Tony was really getting the best of him in the striking for the majority of the fight until he landed that kick in round 2, but I'll get to why he landed that kick in round 2. So up until that point, Tony was really landing on him a lot from the southpaw stance. So you can see as they step in here, Chandler goes to throw this leg kick and Tony's able to reach him first with that right hook counter over the top. And that is a favorite strike of Poirier that he likes to throw a lot too. And this was a strike that Tony was able to land a lot. And as they came out too, he could also throw this left hook and catch Chandler on the way out. And that one specifically knocked him off balance pretty good, because again, that that recoil distance that we talked about, when Chandler steps in, he has to travel back. He has a long way to go, and he can be vulnerable to these hooks, leaving that close quarters engagement and be knocked off balance or knocked down. Again, another exchange here. Chandler goes to throw his signature lunging right hand to the body here, and Tony goes to counter over the top. but he notices obviously that Chandler's duck low after that shot, and he's able to throw the uppercuts. It's tough to see here because it's blurry. It doesn't connect clean on Chandler's face, but it does hit him, and you can see the potential there for him to be struck by that, and again knocked off balance here out of his stance. Another dangerous thing about this right hand of the body and the opponent potentially picking up on it is the incoming knee as Chandler steps in. So Tony started to pick up on this right hand coming into the body, and as Chandler went to throw it, he would throw up this knee, and it just barely missed. But again, it's one of those things that the opponent can pick up on and throw that counter knee as he steps in, either for the takedown or the right hand of the body. So it can be a vulnerability, especially the way Chandler likes to throw it, where he throws it repeatedly throughout a fight. Again, we can see the consequences of that big, powerful winding up style here as Tony steps in to throw a leg kick, and Chandler goes to throw a big left hook here with a ton of power and misses. And because he misses, it gets him way out of position here. You can see that wind up and the momentum from that punch sent him way out of position, which is obviously not great. Chandler was also having trouble landing the jab as Ferguson started to pick up on his timing. He would jab here, and because of the Southpaw versus Orthodox stance matchup, Tony's lead hand is here and able to parry the jab. We saw this with Islam and Oliveira as well. But since they have this stance matchup, Tony's able to parry that jab. They reset. Chandler goes in this time to throw that right hand to the body, and he gets intercepted here by this counter shot. And as he comes out of this, he's going to be vulnerable to the hook again because, again, he's committed to this shot, lunging in really hard, and he's got a long way to travel back. So similar to the Oliveira fight, here he comes back out of this position, and here comes the incoming hook from Tony that tags him on the exit. Again here, Chandler goes to throw the jab. Tony parries it because of that southpaw stance. Chandler goes to follow it up with the right hand, but Tony's able to get a read on the distance because he was able to parry that jab. He can feel the distance. He steps back out of range. It kind of grazes him a little bit. Chandler is now out of his stance because he lunged in with that right hand really hard, and boom, lands the counter left hook over the top, which again knocks Chandler off balance and out of position. This is the difficulties of the southpaw matchup and having that jab being parried and reading his timing. So then the question becomes, well, how did Chandler knock out Tony then? If Tony, a southpaw, was getting the better of him in the striking over and over again, what went wrong? Well, going back to the threat of the takedown, Chandler decided, screw the striking game, let's get a takedown in here and mix it up, which was a really good idea on his part. So he shot the double leg, and he could hit this takedown because he set it up by throwing that right hand to the body over and over again. So he was able to throw a takedown from that same stance, and he got this double leg on Tony, and he was able to ride out this round, and land quite a bit of damage on Tony and just hold him down and neutralize him and drain a lot of his energy dealing with this position with Chandler on top. So heading into the second round, Tony comes out in a much more defensive stance, right? And look at this distance between them. Tony was very hesitant to engage anymore. You could see that the confidence in the striking had gone down because now he had been taken down and he didn't want to deal with that again. So he's going to keep this distance in order to read the shot from far away. Chandler can't shoot from this far away. It's too far. He'll be able to sprawl on it. Tony kept this distance the whole time. Again, a lot of distance between them, and he was just kind of waiting. He never threw an attack in this round. And so Chandler started to close the gap, figuring that Tony's going to be passive, and he decided to just throw this kick. This was Chandler's first strike in the round. He decided to throw a new weapon at him, a teep from far away, which, can cover a lot of distance, obviously throwing your leg up, and it just happened to nail him perfectly. And even Chandler himself said later on that he didn't expect this one to knock him out. He kind of just threw it out there. The threat of the takedown made Tony hesitant to even get close to him, and it left him open to get hit by that kick. So it's important to keep in mind that the looming threat of the takedown from Chandler can always change the fight in an instant. He can always land a knockout shot. That is from the time the bell rings to the time the fight ends. Any time in between there, he can land a knockout just because of that threat. So let's move on to Poirier now, though, and some of the things that he does really well. Now, one of the cornerstones of his game is that he has a really good left straight. He landed this over and over again on Oliveira. He sends it right down the pipe. He's really fast with it, and he can land this on orthodox fighters really well. He also has a really good right hook counter over the top against orthodox guys. He tends to throw this and land this a lot on orthodox fighters, and he did beautifully over and over again on Oliveira. Now, another strength of Poirier is that he's really good, even when he overextends, at staying tight in his stance and staying disciplined with his defense. So here against Alvarez, he lunges in with this left hand. He comes in pretty far. Alvarez slips it. Alvarez goes to counter to throw this hook. But again, right away, Poirier is throwing this left arm down as kind of a deflection, and he's going to keep this right hand up really high to defend this incoming hook, and he's staying disciplined in his stance. He's got this coming across, he's got this up defending, and he stays tight here. He's got this elbow tight to his body, which defends the body shot. The hand defends the hook up high, and he just stays tight with his defense even though he got overextended, and he exits the encounter with a jab of his own to kind of get Alvarez back on the defensive. So just a really good sequence from Poirier there. Steps in, overextends, keeps his defense up, and exits with the jab. Really clean. He also has a really quick jab that he will throw out there, sometimes double and triple up on it, but stays tight in his stance. He doesn't really lunge hard with it. He'll throw it out there and it can be a stinging jab, but he recoils to his stance really well. He stays disciplined in his stance a lot to always be ready for the incoming attack if it were to come back in a counter. Now, one of the best strengths of Poirier is he's very patient with his flurries. He can throw a flurry in a disciplined way, and if he knows the finish isn't there, he won't chase it and overextend himself and get knocked out because of it. Sometimes he can be baited into firefights, of course, which I will get into, but in general, he's very patient with his flurries and waits for the finish to come to him. An example of this is against Gaethje, where Gaethje throws this leg kick. Poirier counters by throwing an uppercut, follows it up with a right hook. Again, continuing the flurry here, left hook, follows him. Dean gets in the way there a little bit, so it's tough to see. He throws another uppercut here, continues to follow him across the cage, and he's going to throw this left hook hard. This was a really quick shot. It's a nasty left hook. But he can see that Gaethje's shelling up, and he's a little bit dazed from it, but the finish isn't there necessarily. So Poirier's patient and kind of pulls back as Gaethje goes backwards there from that flurry. He doesn't go and chase it, he doesn't go and dump the gas tank. He's very patient with it. He landed 6, 7, 8 punches there in real time, but he was patient enough to not follow it up and get way out of position. Now later in the fight, where he really hurt Gaethje and eventually finished him, Gaethje pushes in. Again, Poirier has this really nasty left straight, and he throws it straight down the pipe, nails Justin with it, which really hurts him. I mean, I don't even know how he didn't fall right here. But, Justin goes reeling backwards, and so Dustin's going to have to cover all of this distance. Dustin was also hobbling here a bit from the leg kicks, but anyway, he comes all the way across, and this would typically be a dangerous situation to where this fighter that's hurt could throw a hard overhand right at the guy coming in and potentially land a knockout himself. It's like the old Scott Smith KO from years ago, where his opponent chased him and he nailed him with a shot, thinking that Scott Smith was hurt from the body shot, and Scott Smith ended up KOing him. But anyway, Poirier, when he comes in here, he runs across the cage, but immediately gets in his stance, puts his hands up. He's disciplined with that stance. He knows that his opponent's always dangerous. And, he goes right back into defending. And when Gaethje tries to throw that overhand, Poirier's got his hands up. He can defend this. He's not going to get caught by that shot. And he goes right back to throwing that flurry, and Gaethje's just hurt really bad at this point. And he's staying tight with his defense. He's keeping his hands up, and he's just boxing intelligently here. He continues to follow up the flurry. Again, Gaethje goes reeling back. A lot of space he's got to cover here. But when he comes back in, he's got his hands back up, continues to land the punches. And Gaethje again goes to throw these huge looping overhand rights, which is about as good as you can do in this scenario, being this badly stunned. He's eaten a lot of shots at this point. And Poirier just continues to stay disciplined with his hands, land strikes. Even as Gaethje hits the fence, Poirier is even patient with this. He doesn't hesitate, but he doesn't just fly in there with his hands down. He goes in and he approaches him with a straight that just lands right on the button again. Just really calculated. And he also cuts this angle. He's got this perpendicular angle again here, to where Gaethje now can't even throw counter shots anymore because he's got the dominant angle on him. It eventually finishes here. But really good flurry in general. Even when there's a lot of space to cover, he'll reset and keep his hands up. He's always cautious. He knows that his opponent is always dangerous, and he respects that. He's a really intelligent boxer in that sense. So expanding on his defense, he just has good fundamentals, and he can give orthodox fighters specifically a lot of problems in that southpaw stance. So here Alvarez goes to jab, or to kind of feint it and kind of throw it out there, and Poirier, again, the southpaw fighter can probe this hand and keep it there to either parry it or to get a read on the distance and timing of the orthodox fighter. and he throws his own jab out there. Alvarez slips it, and Alvarez comes to throw the right hook to the body here. But again, Dustin stays tight with his arm to his body and starts to pivot out this way, which deflects this incoming shot as he's turning. So as Dustin's turning, it's taking some of the sting out of this shot, and even this left hook to the body. This one lands pretty good, but Dustin's still turning and also keeping this arm up to deflect any incoming shots that it may be coming up top. He's also got this hand up on this side, which you can't see, but he's always got his hands up defending his position, and now you can see it here. Alvarez comes back with that right hook over the top. So Alvarez was able to get that body shot through, but he's not able to get this right hook through because Dustin keeps his defense tight. Again, here against Charles Oliveira, when he overextends, they go to get into this exchange here. He throws the right hook. He's caught in this bad angle here to where he is overturned now because he lunged in so far, and Charles has a good angle on him to counter over the top here. Dustin recognizes this though and starts pulling back. But again, he's got his hands up. He's got this arm up to deflect an incoming shot. Potentially, he's guarding his face while also backing out. And you can see how this obstructs the eyesight of Oliveira in any incoming punches. And then he keeps this hand up on the outside to block that right hand. So just good fundamentals, staying disciplined in his stance and avoiding the attack even when he overextends. Here, a good close quarter sequence with Oliveira. Dustin throws the left. Oliveira goes to counter with that left hook. Dustin starts to slip it. He ducks down. Oliveira goes to throw that right hand, but Dustin stays low and also keeps this hand up near his head, staying disciplined with that defense again. Oliveira is able to get the clinch though and throw this uppercut, but because of that hand right here, it kind of obstructs Oliveira's uppercut and it doesn't really land flush. It's kind of like the top of his hand here, it hits him and it breaks up the impact of that uppercut fully. Oliveira continues to buckle down on that tie clinch there, and Dustin throws the body shot, and then he throws an uppercut, and then he throws a hook over the top. So really fighting to break this up, not allowing him to get that position, and all while staying disciplined with his own defense. He didn't really take any damage there, and he's able to throw his own left straight and back off and break up that whole sequence by Oliveira, which was starting to look pretty good for Oliveira getting that clinch position and that uppercut. Now, switching gears to some of the vulnerabilities that are relevant to this fight that I've noticed is that Poirier can be drawn into firefights. He can get into grappling scenarios on the fence that don't really favor him, and when defending the double leg specifically, he has a strong tendency to go for guillotines, which is a very high risk, high reward scenario, but very low percentage in general. At least at the elite level, it's low percentage. So looking here at the Max Holloway fight, Max Holloway pushes in and starts to pressure him against the fence, throwing a hard flurry here, and Dustin is forced to get into a firefight here to try to get off the fence, but instead of circling out or trying to move laterally, he just gets into a straight up firefight here, throwing a lot of shots, and Max is connecting on him. He starts to circle out, but Max catches up to him with that hook on the way out. It is worth noting though, good defense here. He's still aware, he's still got that arm up defending the shot, but again, Max pushes him to the fence and lands a good knee. From there, Max makes distance again and continues to just bombard him with shots and throw a flying knee. And what happens is, a lot of the time on the fence with Poirier, if he starts to get pressured really hard, he'll look to start to push for the takedown, and it's tough to tell if he's really trying to get to the takedown or if he's using it as a position to try to buy some time and to just get out of the firefight and stop getting hit, and to try to gain some energy back, try to conserve some energy and recover. Because right here he starts to push Holloway into the fence after catching that flying knee and push him up against the fence, but even that starts to get him elbowed, hanging out in this position too long. He never really looked to finish this takedown fully. He was mainly just using it as a way to buy time, clinch, close the distance, stop getting hit. But Max was savvy enough to land some elbows coming in here as well. Now the Hooker fight is that fight you worry about if you're a Poirier fan. The Ferguson fight should be the fight you worry about if you're a Chandler fan, because of some of the tendencies that he showed against the Southpaw and getting outstruck, which can translate to Poirier outstriking him. But the tendencies that Poirier showed in the Hooker fight aren't great either against an orthodox fighter, and his tendency to be drawn into firefights and just how many punches he took in that fight overall. Now I question if this is kind of an outlier, weird fight for him, because he was coming off the Khabib loss, and it kind of reminds me like how in football, or American football for anybody watching outside of the US, they will say that teams have a Super Bowl hangover. After they win the championship, the next year they don't do as well. They kind of have like a hangover, and I kind of wondered if coming out of that title fight with Khabib, if he kind of had a championship hangover. He didn't win the fight, but this fight was more of a war than it should have been. I think Poirier should have won in a way that was a bit cleaner than what happened. This is a very brutal fight for both guys. Both guys ate a lot of shots and it was very grueling. So you can see here, this was in round 2. They engage. Hooker's able to counter Poirier's left there. They engage in this firefight. Hooker fires back, hits him, and Poirier starts to get pressured towards the fence here. And as Hooker presses in, again, Poirier, good awareness, still got that defense going on, but not so great awareness in terms of getting pushed to the fence here. Allows himself to get pushed to the fence. Again, knees being thrown at him, similar to the Holloway fight, and he looks to get the takedown. Very similar to the Holloway fight. He starts to engage in this takedown mode when pressured on the fence. I think in general, Poirier is better out in space and open space. He's really deadly out there. On the fence, things get a little iffy sometimes. So he continues to clinch with Hooker here, tries to trip Hooker. They're engaging in this grueling clinch battle, going back and forth. Hooker is able to turn him around and pressure him back into the fence again. Poirier goes to throw that elbow, again engaging in this firefight, not circling out too much, just exchanging strikes here. Back and forth they go, and again then Poirier ducks down to look for this takedown and eats a knee for it. After taking that knee, he backs up to the fence, and here they go again, exchanging strikes, literally mirroring each other's uppercuts. Back into this firefight, taking strikes from Hooker, delivering his own strikes back, bam bam, trying to push him back out of the center, but ultimately going right back down to that takedown tendency, pushing him against the fence, again buying time. An exhausting, grueling fight, but Hooker turns him around now, and this whole scenario was just rough in general. He really got clipped by this shot, and he ate a lot of punches in there. He didn't circle out as much as he probably should have. It's one thing for me to say that sitting here in a chair rather than being in the cage against an elite fighter. It's easier said than done, but just analyzing it from this viewpoint, he can get drawn into firefights sometimes, and he can tend to start to fall back on takedowns to buy him time, or at least clinch positions that look like takedowns. I don't know how bad he wants those double legs, but in general, I think that Poirier is better in space than he is on the fence. Now, speaking of Poirier going for double legs, we've talked a lot about the striking, but what about the grappling here and the threat of Chandler's takedown? So looking at how Chandler can set up double legs, let's go back to the Gaethje fight here. So in this fight, they end up in this exchange. He throws a jab, kind of backs up as Gaethje feints coming in, and he steps off to an angle here. Now, this is going to be pretty significant because as Chandler resets out here, he's going to maintain this angle and come back in at kind of a diagonal here. Now, this is optimal for shooting a takedown rather than coming straight on. So let me illustrate here something off to the side. Let's say that Gaethje is this square, right? If you want to shoot a takedown, you want to shoot this way towards the square. You want to shoot to his far angles because he's going to be weakest there, rather than shooting straight on to where you can get sprawled on. It's much harder to sprawl on a takedown that's coming from these corner angles than it is to sprawl on one coming straight on. And that's where Chandler is coming from. He's this arrow right now. Gaethje's turning into him a little bit, but he still has this diagonal angle. So he steps in, foot right between his legs, just textbook perfect double leg here, gets deep on the shot, and he's going to start to bring his head up here under the armpit of Gaethje and rise up pretty high. Now, Gaethje, recognizing this and being a great wrestler himself, he knows he's pretty screwed at this point. The shot is really deep. He's got his head really high. So his best maneuver is to roll with it this way. And this is just a genius reaction by Gaethje, honestly. He folds over this way and he's reaching for Chandler's leg. You can see his arms coming down here. He reaches for Chandler's leg and he wraps him up like this, and he's going to roll with the takedown. So as they land here in this high impact takedown, Gaethje rolls through. He's got this grip, which is going to send Chandler this way, and he throws him off the top while also pushing him this way. And that causes Chandler to topple over the top and Gaethje to get this top position, sneaking out the back door and putting Chandler in a bad spot. So just a great counter there by Gaethje as a side note, but also highlighting how Chandler can cut angles like that out of nowhere and just hit huge takedowns. Now, against Tony, things were a little bit different. And the point I really want to highlight here is somebody like Gaethje is not willing to play guard. He does not want to play guard. He wants to fight the takedown. He will scramble and roll through. He will sprawl. He will do anything to avoid the takedown. He's not willing to play guard. Someone like Ferguson is more willing to play guard. He doesn't want to get taken down either, and he also has a wrestling background. But if you get deep in on a shot, he's more willing to play guard, throw elbows, do things like that. He's more jiu-jitsu oriented than Gaethje is by default. Gaethje's more wrestling oriented. So Chandler shoots his deep shot on Ferguson. Ferguson gets caught here with his legs pretty close together, not optimal. He tries to sprawl here, but he can't. Chandler's just got a really deep grip here, and he can sprawl here a little bit. I'll correct that. It's just not going to be far enough for the power that Chandler's generating, driving through this takedown at an angle. You know, he's cutting the corner here, and he shoots this overhook up really high. He's firing it like this, which is sending Tony flying through the air as well, and is also going to give him control as they land, and allows him to post his hand here. So, you know, this underhook is controlling Tony's body, preventing the scramble. He won't be able to scramble like Gaethje did, although they're in two different positions. He's not going to be able to create a scramble situation because of this underhook. It's going to be really hard. And just in general, Tony's more willing to play guard, like I said. So the effectiveness of Chandler's takedowns depends on what the opponent really prefers. Are they more likely to play guard? Do they want to fight and scramble? You know, what is the opponent more likely to do in response to a double leg? Gaethje's going to fight it to the end, tooth and nail. Ferguson, he'll fight it, but he'll also be fine playing guard as well. But, you know, that ultimately got him controlled and ground and pounded and lost him the fight. Really, it set up that KO later, as I mentioned before. So let's look at the difference again with somebody like Gaethje caught in the same position. Chandler shoots a takedown, and he ends up in this similar leg position where his legs are almost bundled together. He's on one hip. Let's look at the difference of what Gaethje does, though. I believe that Gaethje was a higher level wrestler in college, and I think it shows. You know, it doesn't always translate to MMA, but in scenarios like this, I think it shows. His hips are really, really good, and his instincts and reactions are. So as Chandler gets in this similar position as Ferguson, Gaethje's immediately going to reach down for this arm and look to pull it up. So he pulls up on this arm right here, which makes Chandler's hands come up higher. They're not as low on his legs as they were before. And as he continues to drive through here, Gaethje's going to shift his hips this way now. So let's go back one frame. His hips were, let's go back even one more, a couple more. So his hips are facing this way. As we progress, now they're more squared up. And as we progress again, they start to shift this way, and he's going to drop his weight really low into a sprawl, which is going to make Chandler's hands come up even higher to break up this takedown. And now they're up into a body lock, and Gaethje has this hard overhook where he can really wrench down on it and throw his body into it. And then as he does that, now we're in this clinch position here where Gaethje has double overhooks, and then Gaethje is able to separate from there. So Chandler's effectiveness with the double leg depends on his opponent's tendencies. Are they more willing to play guard? Are they more willing to fight the takedown like a really good wrestler would? And are they a really good wrestler themselves? So that begs the question, what does Poirier typically do with double legs? Well, let's take a look. So the way Poirier typically handles double legs, I believe, is his other weakness. I said before that he has a strong tendency to look for the guillotine. So here against Hooker ducks low and shoots the takedown. Immediately Poirier looks to start wrapping up that head and to shoot that guillotine. And like I said before, this can be high risk, high reward, but generally it's a low percentage move against elite opponents. It's very hard to hit this. And he gets pretty good position here, but he's not able to fully wrap up close guard. And eventually, you know, Hooker starts projecting his weight this way, which takes some of that pressure off the guillotine. And they're really slippery at this point too. It's round 3, there's blood and everything, sweat, and he's able to pop his head out. Against Khabib shoots a double leg, pushes him to the fence. Again, Dustin immediately jumps on this guillotine, and Khabib's able to pop his head out of that one, and he ends up in a bad position before it. Again, it's high risk, high reward, but it can also put you in a very bad position if it falls on the side of risk, which on average it's going to. Again, Khabib later shoots a double leg on him, pushes him to the fence, and Poirier defends by wrapping up the neck and going for this guillotine again. Now this attempt was actually pretty good. If he could get closed guard here, he may have finished the fight, and the danger of getting closed guard is that you can roll the opponent and end up in mount. And, you know, defending a mounted guillotine is almost impossible when it's super deep. The only person who's really done it successfully recently is Volkanovski, who's just inhuman against Ortega. Another story though, that was ridiculous. But even Khabib said this one was really tight later on. But Khabib does a smart thing here, rolls to his shoulder to try to alleviate some of the pressure, creates a scramble. Poirier's response though was good too. He rolls back through for the guillotine to ratchet down on it again. But Khabib starts again projecting his weight forward here, putting pressure on it, and falls to his shoulder, which again kills some of that pressure on the guillotine, some of that leverage he has. And eventually Khabib is going to wiggle out of this and to pop his head out. And because of that, he ends up in a really bad position again, you know, going for that, which eventually led to his demise in this fight. Looking again at the Hooker fight, Hooker shoots a takedown. Dustin starts to wrap his head up right away, goes for the guillotine, and you know, ends up in guard because of it, or in half guard actually. Hooker ends up in a pretty good position here to start working ground and pound. It's just a tendency that you see Poirier do over and over again. Again, he goes for it again here, tries the high elbow guillotine, but Hooker rolls out of it, is able to create a scramble and breaks it up. You know, this one Poirier lands up on top, which is obviously more beneficial, but we see this pattern over and over again. Double leg guillotine attempt. It might be something that Poirier hits a lot in practice, and that's why he does it. But in the fight, it's going to be really hard to hit against opponents in a live scenario. Against Chandler, I don't see Chandler getting guillotined. He's never been submitted, and I don't see it happening in this fight either. So I think this is a negative towards Poirier. And just real quick, ironically, when Oliveira took down Chandler, Chandler's response was to also go for the arm-in guillotine off the takedown attempt, which didn't work either and ended him up in half guard as well. So all in all, I tend to favor Poirier slightly in this fight. Chandler can win at any time though. He's extremely athletic and explosive. If he uses his wrestling, I think it would be a really good idea. I think a lot of people are expecting this to be a firefight, especially with Chandler's style lately, wanting to be as exciting as possible and to make the most money as possible. But he also wants to win. He wants to get that championship. I think it'd be a real staple for his legacy to be a Bellator and UFC champion. And, you know, ultimately he needs to get the win, and he needs to fight smart here against a guy who can knock him out as well. You know, Chandler has the power in his hands, but so does Poirier. You know, I think that Chandler has the concussive power advantage, meaning more one-shot power. Poirier is more typically the type to stun you and finish you with a flurry. Chandler can put your lights out with one shot, just completely out unconscious on the floor. I also like Poirier a little bit more in this fight because he has a more energy efficient style. He doesn't put as much into every shot. He stays more disciplined in his stance and with his defense, and I think that can pay dividends. Although this is a 3-round fight versus a 5-round. If this was a 5-round, I'd favor Poirier even more. But Chandler has a little bit more leeway here to really dump the gas tank and not worry about gassing out as much. Although we did see him fatigue pretty substantially against Gaethje. I think it would be a really good idea for both guys to wrestle. Whoever wrestles effectively here, I feel like is going to have the advantage overall. Although with Poirier's takedown efficiency against Chandler, it might burn more energy than the benefit that he reaps from it. So it might be better for him to stay at range and pepper with body shots, teeps, you know, hooks to the body like we saw, and just work that energy efficient style and try to counter Chandler coming in. You know, generally, you know, speaking in general, Southpaws like to counter on average. You know, there's plenty of aggressive Southpaws as well, but the Southpaw style against an orthodox fighter lends itself to being a good counter striker, and I think that would really benefit him here. Chandler, on the other hand, should use his takedowns. He should fight smart. Why get into a firefight? I think it would really benefit him to throw some takedowns in the mix and try to drain the energy in the gas tank of Poirier and throw him off his game. Get him up against the fence, get him into those ugly firefights and those takedown scenarios where he's getting tired and getting a bit sloppier with his technique. Don't let him stay sharp at range and let him pepper you with jabs and straights. At the time of filming this, Vegas has Poirier at a favorite at -175. But I think that's a little bit wide. I would bring that down just slightly, maybe -130 or so. I think that's more accurate because I think the fight's a little bit closer than what the odds say. But I do like Poirier's chances overall. And, you know, I just can't wait to watch this one. Chandler can beat anybody at any time. It's going to make it for a great fight, and he has just as much of a chance as Poirier does. But I like Poirier's tendencies just a little bit better. So if I had to lean one way, I would go that way. But again, Chandler is just as much of a shot as anybody does. And if anybody can end a fight with one shot in an instant, it's him.